On September 15, 1935, in the city of Nuremberg, the Third Reich proclaimed a new legal framework that redefined citizenship in Germany. These were the Nuremberg Laws, a set of regulations that formalized racial segregation and stripped Jews of their German citizenship. Among them, the law for the protection of German blood and German honor imposed strict prohibitions. Marriages between Jews and persons of German or related blood were entirely annulled, even if conducted in another country. But the legislation extended beyond marriage. Any extramarital relationship between Jews and German citizens was declared illegal, becoming a punishable offense. For the regime, these measures were not merely political. They were part of a racial protection strategy rooted in the ideology of ethnic purity. Nazi rhetoric insisted that German blood must remain untouched to ensure the continuity of the nation, a concept drawn directly from Adolf Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. From the Reichstag podium, the passage of these laws was presented as an act of unanimous consensus. However, beneath this formal appearance, the new laws merely codified discriminatory practices that were already in place. For the Jewish community in Germany, this announcement was not just another restriction. It was a warning of a future where exclusion would become the rule. Segregation was now inscribed in law, and the next step would be its systematic enforcement. What began as a legal framework for separation soon became a tool of persecution. A mere suspicion was enough to be arrested, tried without evidence, and sent to a concentration camp. The Nazi authorities launched campaigns to report those who violated these rules, encouraging distrust among neighbors, friends, and even family members. The state's control over private life grew stronger, solidifying a regime where racial purity was law. The Nuremberg laws extended to the occupied territories, where they were enforced with brutality. In Vienna, Prague, and Warsaw, German authorities increased surveillance over the Jewish population, identifying, isolating, and preparing them for what was to come. Legal exclusion marked the beginning of a process that would culminate in the final solution. But even amid the horror, the unthinkable happened. A young Austrian SS officer fell in love with a Jewish prisoner. Franz Wunsch was born on March 21, 1922, in Draußenhofen, Austria, into a family with nationalist roots. Like many young men of his generation, he grew up in an environment where Nazi propaganda permeated every aspect of education and society. The annexation of Austria into the Third Reich in 1938 not only cemented German control over his country, but also expanded recruitment into the SS, portrayed as the elite of National Socialism. At just 18 years old, the Austrian was accepted into the SS after a selection process that emphasized racial purity, physical strength, and devotion to the Führer. In training centers, recruits received military instruction, but also ideological indoctrination. They were taught that compassion was a weakness and that the struggle for Aryan supremacy justified any act. Discipline was strict, and brutality was seen as a tool of control. During the early years of the war, he served in various units, demonstrating loyalty to the regime. His specific role within the SS had yet to be defined, but soon his fate would change. In September 1939, Germany launched its offensive against Poland, initiating the deadliest war in history. Within weeks, Nazi forces occupied the country, unleashing a regime of atrocities. The persecution of Jews intensified with the creation of ghettos and mass deportations. Meanwhile, at the heart of the Reich, the German war machine demanded ever more soldiers, and the SS's role in the conflict expanded. In 1941, the invasion of the Soviet Union brought brutality to a new level. During the offensive, special units carried out systematic executions in the occupied territories. Franz, deployed on the Eastern Front, suffered an injury that removed him from combat. Instead of being discharged from service, he was reassigned to a different role within the Nazi system, guard duty at Auschwitz. With this assignment, he became a member of the SS Totenkopf, a unit specialized in managing concentration camps. Auschwitz was no ordinary posting. He was assigned to oversee the looting warehouses known as Canada, where belongings confiscated from prisoners were stored. From there, he witnessed the relentless arrival of trains to the camp. Upon disembarking, prisoners were organized into lines under strict SS supervision. Each transport brought not only human beings, but also tons of plundered personal effects. Suitcases, jewelry, documents, clothing, and even children's toys were immediately confiscated. The young SS member had direct access to these goods and participated in managing them, ensuring that anything of value was sent to the Reich. Auschwitz was not merely a prisoner camp, it also served as a key hub in the Nazi war economy. Auschwitz was not originally designed for what it eventually became. In its early days, the camp had the capacity to hold 125,000 Soviet prisoners of war. However, its purpose quickly changed. It became an extermination center, where efficiency and logistics were optimized for the systematic elimination of people. Birkenau, the largest section of the complex, was central to this transformation. Built in 1941, its infrastructure was designed to accommodate large convoys of deportees. Railway tracks extended into the heart of the camp, facilitating the daily disembarkation of thousands of prisoners. Crude barracks, electrified fences, and guard towers created an environment where the SS maintained absolute control, ensuring no one could escape. Each new transport brought prisoners from different parts of Europe. The newly arrived, weakened after days of travel without food or water, were subjected to immediate selection. For the SS, Auschwitz was becoming a key node in the Nazi machine. In Auschwitz, dehumanization was immediate. Prisoners deemed fit for labor were tattooed with a number, had their heads shaved, and were forced to wear tattered uniforms. From that moment on, their only purpose was to work until their bodies gave out. Workdays could last up to 16 hours, with no food and under freezing conditions. Franz Wunsch had a clear task: to ensure the system operated without interruption. He oversaw discipline in the camp and ensured obedience was upheld at all costs. A single mistake by a prisoner could result in a beating, a summary execution, or transfer to the starvation barracks, where exhaustion would finish the job. The camp's daily routine was designed to break prisoners' spirits. Yet amid the horror, some tried to find ways to survive. Sometimes a prisoner's fate could change due to a single unexpected act. On March 21, 1942, SS officers celebrated Franz's birthday at Auschwitz. Amidst drinks and laughter, female prisoners were forced to serve them, knowing that any mistake could cost them their lives. Helena Citronová, a young Slovak Jewish woman, had arrived on one of the first transports of female prisoners. Deceived by the promise of work, she ended up in a camp where torture was routine. To survive, she learned quickly: obey, avoid standing out, and never provoke. During the celebration, a capo ordered someone to sing. Helena knew that refusing was not an option. She stepped forward and began singing in German. Her voice was weak at first, but gradually it grew stronger. When she finished, the birthday celebrant ordered her to sing the song again. No one understood why, but he never took his eyes off Helena. The next morning, Helena's name appeared on a list. She was to return to the same place. When she arrived at the barrack, the Nazi officer was already waiting for her. Without explanation, he handed her a piece of bread and a coat. From that moment on, he began to seek her out in the warehouse where he usually stood guard. At first, the encounters were brief, just fleeting moments when he would leave food, clothing, or small gifts. Helena didn't know how to react. She hated him and didn't trust him, but in Auschwitz every favor came at a price, and refusing could mean death. Over time, she began to notice something strange about him. He didn't look at her the way the other guards did, and his voice lacked the commanding tone he used with other prisoners. At first, she thought it was a tactic, but with every meeting the image of the cruel officer faded a little more. For Franz, Helena became an obsession. He couldn't explain it, but every time he saw her, his duties as an SS Totenkopf officer became secondary. The dynamic between them shifted. What began as a silent exchange of favors turned into something more complex. Helena felt no affection for him, but each gesture forced her to reconsider what she thought was impossible. He, blinded by a feeling he couldn't openly express, began to take greater risks for her. What was happening did not go unnoticed. The Birkenau camp was not a place where privacy existed. Prisoners quickly noticed the attention the SS officer gave her. Some believed Helena was lucky to be under an officer's watch, but many others saw her as a traitor. Tensions rose, suspicious glances became constant, and whispers turned into threats. The risk was clear, but Helena knew how to use it. Desperate prisoners approached her seeking help, convinced that Franz would do anything to please her. Helena began passing him notes with inmates' identification numbers and the word help, ensuring their protection. He, blinded by what he felt, agreed without hesitation. While he saw her as the love of his life, others saw her as a threat. Each gesture, each look, and each favor put her in greater danger. In October 1943, an anonymous inmate denounced Helena and Franz. Rumors circulated that their relationship had gone beyond what was permitted. That same night, guards pulled her from her barrack and took her to Block 11, the place reserved for prisoners accused of serious offenses. The cell was so small she could barely curl up on the floor. For 5 days she was interrogated without rest, forced to confess. On several occasions, they shoved her against the wall, pointed a gun at her, and assured her she could be executed at any moment. Meanwhile, the young Austrian was subjected to a separate interrogation. The authorities wanted to know how far he had gone with a Jewish prisoner. He stood firm and denied all accusations. When brought before the SS tribunal, he stood to attention and raised his hand in a Nazi salute. No further questions were asked. The judge, instead of condemning him, simply winked and let him go. After the final verdict, Helena returned to the camp, her body broken. The glances from her fellow prisoners, once indifferent, now turned colder and more hostile. Her situation had completely changed, and every decision from that moment forward would be crucial. A few days later, Helena fell ill with typhus, a sure death sentence in Auschwitz. The fever quickly drained her strength. Any prisoner with that condition was considered as good as dead. Franz knew this and acted before the situation worsened. He hid her atop some shelves in the warehouse where they met, taking advantage of the chaos and total disorder in the place. There, he improvised a bed with blankets and made sure no one suspected anything. Each day he climbed up to see her, bringing her bread, broth, and the food packages he received from his mother. He cared for her in silence, waiting for her to wake up, watching as her body fought the fever. But Helena worsened, and he knew it. In a desperate act, he turned to Dr. Josef Mengele, the man who decided who lived and who died. Franz had no power over his decisions, but he tried anyway. He offered his record collection, his most prized possession, in exchange for her life. He asked for nothing else, only that she be allowed to live. Days later, Helena opened her eyes. Franz looked at her as if he had accomplished the impossible. She didn't understand why he had done it, but in that moment something changed. For the first time, she didn't see him as a guard, but as a man willing to risk everything for her. While still struggling to recover from typhus, Helena was shattered by heartbreaking news. Her sister Rosika had arrived at Auschwitz with her 2 children, a 9-year-old girl and a newborn baby. Despair immediately overwhelmed her. Without hesitation, she gathered what little strength she had left and ran to the selection area, but it was already too late. The guards had sent them directly to the gas chambers. Desperate, she pleaded for their lives, begging the officers to let them live, but the decision had already been made. When she realized there was no hope, she asked to die with them. The guards, indifferent, were about to grant her request when suddenly Franz appeared. He rushed toward her and beat her savagely in front of everyone, pretending to punish her for breaking curfew. Then he leaned down and whispered, "Tell me your sister's name." Minutes later, he ran to the crematorium and managed to stop the process in time. He convinced the officers that Rosika was still fit for labor, but he could do nothing for her children. In Auschwitz, the youngest didn't count. Helena returned to her barrack, her body broken and her gaze empty. Rosika had survived, but the price of staying alive in Auschwitz was higher than ever. In January 1945, the advance of the Red Army forced the Nazis to evacuate Auschwitz. The prisoners were lined up for what would become known as the Death March. Only those strong enough to walk would be allowed to live. Before the departure, Franz searched for Helena in her barrack. The place was empty. Most had already been taken for the march. Only she remained, awaiting the inevitable. They looked at each other without speaking. After all that time, there were no words left. "I have loved you deeply," he finally said. Helena, with tears in her eyes, held him tightly and begged, "Don't forget me." Outside, the officers shouting hurried the formation. The temperature was falling rapidly, and the journey ahead would be brutal. The SS Totenkopf officer couldn't stop the evacuation, but he still had one more thing to do for her and her sister. In silence, he handed them a pair of fur-lined boots. It was no small gesture. The Polish winter was brutal, and the death march showed no mercy to the weak. Without proper clothing, many prisoners would collapse along the way, doomed by cold and exhaustion. The prisoners advanced with great difficulty. There was no path, only snow and ice. Each step tore the skin from their feet. Franz knew this. He couldn't stop the march, but the boots he gave might make a difference. Days later, on January 27, 1945, the Red Army finally entered Auschwitz. Helena had survived. In time, she moved to Israel and started a family, but the past never left her. He, once an SS officer, tried to contact her, but a relative replied on her behalf, demanding that he never write again. "The crime you committed will never be washed from your hands," the letter said. The memories of Auschwitz never abandoned her. Years later, her children would recount how she suffered uncontrollable fits of rage, convinced her family was cursed. The war had ended, but her story remained scarred by what she had lived through. In 1972, Franz was arrested in Austria and prosecuted for war crimes. Official documents and survivor testimonies confirmed his involvement in the selections and violence at Auschwitz. Despite the years that had passed, the evidence against him remained intact. Helena received an unexpected letter. It wasn't from the former SS officer, but from his wife. She asked Helena to testify in his favor, assuring her that her testimony could change the outcome of the trial. For days, Helena hesitated. Reliving what had happened meant confronting a past that had never left her, but she knew her words carried undeniable weight. She traveled to Vienna and entered the courtroom with her gaze lowered. Franz was there, but she avoided looking at him. When it was her turn, she testified that he had protected her and helped save her sister, but also confirmed what she had witnessed at Auschwitz, his involvement in the selections and the brutality he inflicted on prisoners. The defense argued that the statute of limitations for prosecuting his crimes had expired. The final verdict was announced. Franz Wunsch was acquitted of all charges. The trial was over, but his story was not. Decades later, Helena's name was still present in Franz's life. His daughter Magda revealed that he never forgot her. He kept a photograph of her taken at Auschwitz, an unusual image in which she was smiling. That photo never left him. He carried it with him, stared at it in silence, as if the past could be rewritten just by looking at it. But he didn't stop at keeping the photo. The former SS officer made multiple copies and began to alter them. He cut out Helena's face and pasted it onto other images, trying to rewrite the story. In the edited photos, Auschwitz disappeared. Helena was no longer a prisoner, but a free woman in an undefined place. Years later, his daughter would recall how her father spoke of Helena with an obsession that never faded. After the war, Franz tried to find her. He wrote to her repeatedly, assuring her that his love remained intact and that he longed to recover what had been lost. But Helena never answered. There were no signs, no farewells. To him, she remained the young woman he had left behind in 1945. To Helena, he was part of a past she never wanted to revisit. The story ended, but not for Franz.